Hi, this is Scott from Chino Basin Water Conservation District here at the Waterwise Community Center Public Park California native planting with one of my very favorite California native large shrubs, which can also be pruned up into a small tree. This is Western Redbud, Cercis occidentalis, and there are so many things that I love about this shrub. First of all, it is a beautiful deciduous multi-trunk shrub which goes through so many different changes throughout the seasons. It loses its leaves in the winter, but does have a nice structural form that actually hummingbirds love to perch on. So I see some of my best kind of hummingbird observations in my garden at home and here, checking out Western Redbud in the winter, even when it has no leaves. Then in the early spring, it gets pink pea-like blooms, usually before any leaves emerge, and they are adored by early season California native pollinators, a really important pollinator plant before most of the other flowering shrubs and perennials have begun for their season. That is immediately followed by, while the plant is still in bloom, by this beautiful flush of new foliage and these gorgeous heart-shaped, very thin leaves. This is a native plant that is tolerant of low water situations, but most people would never guess is a drought-adapted plant because of how delicate this foliage is. And the new growth that emerges is absolutely gorgeous. The new leaves come out glossy and with this bronzish reddish tint around the edges. And that's actually a physiological drought adaptation that helps prevent sunburn on these very delicate, beautiful new leaves, but it's also aesthetically quite nice. This plant will continue to emerge with this beautiful mix of the older green leaves and the bronze new growth for quite a while into the season, and the flowers will then turn into these pods, which are actually quite ornamental themselves. These pods will develop a dried pea-like fruit, which is not something that humans eat, but which is used by birds for a food source. And then finally, later in the season, going into the fall, Western Redbud will start to change leaf color into a yellow with a little bit of brown on it and give us some actual fall color in our Waterwise or California native gardens. It's a plant that is lovely in every stage of its growth and also grows well in so many different situations in the home or commercial landscape. In most landscapes, as the season progresses, you will start to see these interesting crescent-shaped patterns cut in to Western Redbud leaves. And this is evidence of habitat in action. This is what has been removed from the leaves by California native leafcutter bees, which really find Western Redbud to be one of their very favorite plants. So what our native leafcutter bees are doing when they are creating these ornamental shapes is that they are chewing out a small section of these tender Western Redbud leaves. They are transporting it to their nest, and they're actually wrapping their eggs in this section of removed leaf, almost like a little taco, as part of the process of building their nest. Leafcutter bees are great pollinators. They are beautiful if you see them in action, and they actually don't sting humans, making them a pleasure to have around in the garden and a great species to support by planting key native habitat plants like Western Redbud. With all these wonderful qualities about Western Redbud, you might want to ask me, Scott, where can I plant this thing in my yard? Well, another awesome thing about this plant is that it's very flexible in where it can be successfully planted. It can grow happily anywhere from underneath the shade canopy of larger established trees to the shady, but then in the middle of the summer, really hot and sometimes dry north side of a building or other structure. Or it can even grow out in full sun with reflected heat, which is where I have it in my landscape at home, right where the sidewalk meets my driveway, getting full western hot afternoon sun. And it's also remarkably flexible with how often it gets watered. Western Redbud will be perfectly at home in most situations, getting that deep soak of about a 1-inch rain event every 3 to 4 weeks, which is what we generally recommend for Waterwise California native plants, but it can also take water a bit more frequently, which means it will also do well with the every other week in the warm season kind of soak that we recommend for general Waterwise plants or Mediterranean plants. And I've even seen it looking quite happy in a number of residential native gardens where it is in a native planted landscape, but immediately adjacent to a neighbor with a well-watered lawn. This thing is very flexible, easy to grow at home. Now, a few last tips if you want to grow Western Redbud at home. Western Redbud and all Redbuds really want to grow as multi-trunked shrubs, which can be pruned up after they have grown into a small tree by removing the lower branches. However, sometimes nurseries sell them already trained as a single trunk tree. It's very appealing to want to grow them that way. However, if you want to have Western Redbud thrive in your landscape long term, they are really best grown as a shrub. And here is the reason why. When you plant them as a single trunk tree, firstly, they tend not to grow as robustly. They oftentimes are kind of stunted and only grow very slowly for quite a while. Now, secondly, individual branches or trunks of redbuds, once they are getting a bit older, thinking 6, 7, definitely by the time they're 10 years old, can tend to lose vigor. They can tend to flower less. And so the advantage of growing Western Redbud as a multi-trunk large shrub or small tree is that if you ever notice an individual branch really starting to lose that vigor, as a multi, you can prune off that older branch and allow a newer one to come in and replenish itself. Western Redbuds are adapted in their native range to occasional wildfire, which is part of the natural pattern, which means in most cases, if you really have an older shrub that's losing vigor, you can even do what's called coppicing, meaning cutting it all the way to the ground, and you will be rewarded in the next season with a whole flush of vigorous new growth, and you can retrain that tree from the start, having all the vigor of a healthy young tree with this big, well-established root zone that's already drought adapted and ready to grow in a low water situation. If you're trying to grow a single trunk tree, you don't have access to all of those benefits. And finally, as a legume family, a pea family plant, Western Redbud doesn't really like being transplanted, which means planting it as small as possible, which in most cases is going to be from a 1-gallon plant, is going to give you the best results. The larger sizes as they are planted are plants that have been sitting in the nursery for longer and longer, and those plants tend to sulk and not really get growing very quickly after they are transplanted. I've seen it many times where we put a 1-gallon redbud in the ground, and usually it'll just get growing if it's watered properly and grow really vigorously. However, in certain projects, when we've had to plant 5-gallon plants, or when I've seen plants planted even longer, they really take a long time to get growing. So 1-gallon plants are going to be cheaper, they're going to be easiest to plant correctly, and they're going to reward you with fast growth in most situations. There's so much I love about Western Redbud. See if there is going to be a space for one in your garden. It may well become one of your favorite plants as well. For more information about many of our favorite California native and Waterwise plants, including detailed care and maintenance information, be sure to check out our Waterwise Garden Planner website and subscribe to our channel for much more favorite plant content coming soon.